Olivie, Kirsten Barnes, Catherine Williams-Brown, C. Michael Cooney, Lena Darling-Hammond,
Present.
Marisol Escobedo, Jose Gonzalez, Makita Quino-Shire, Johanna Harwick, Alicia Hine, Bonnie Clark, Kevin Kwan, Jane Marks, Monica Martinez, Castle Redmond, Ade Rodriguez, Tina Sloan, Andrew Wall, Stephanie Papas. We have a quorum.
Thank you. I now recess the general session and move to the Educator Preparation Committee. Commissioner Kung, will you please reconvene the committee?
Thank you. I'd like to reconvene the Education Preparation Committee. We have one remaining item this morning. Item 3F. 3F is the initial employment of new teachers in California. This item is being presented by Majore Suko. This is an information item. Ms. Suko, will you please begin?
Good morning, Commissioners. Agenda item 3F is a presentation on initial employment and retention of new teachers in California. The presentation is also available on the website in the PDF form. Sometimes it's hard to see the numbers and labels, so if you want to open the PDF on the website, you can do that and follow along this presentation. Every year in April, we bring the teacher supply report to the Commission. In that report, we publish the number of new credentials issued each year. So this is a pilot study to find out, once these new teachers get the credential, how many new teachers get employment, and what is the employment pattern of these new teachers. Once they get employed, how long they stay employed, what is the retention pattern, and do they stay in the same school site, district, and county. So this is a pilot study to get some additional information as we discuss teacher supply as well as teacher shortage. So what is the purpose of this pilot project? How many new teachers who were credentialed in 1213 found employment after completing the teaching credential program? Did the initial employment rate vary by certain demographic factors such as gender, ethnicity, and age? Did the employment rate vary by type of teaching credential? We have 3 types of teaching credential in California: multiple subject, single subject, and education specialist. What were the employment pattern of these new teachers in California? Then we wanted to look at what was the retention pattern of these new teachers. Did the retention pattern vary by type of teaching credential? Then we also wanted to look at the mobility of these new teachers. So it's almost like 3 parts. First, we wanted to look at the employment pattern, retention pattern, and the mobility of new teachers. Since this information is all relevant to the California public school teachers, I thought I'll start with some context of K-12 students as well as K-12 teachers in California. According to CDE's 2016-17 snapshot, 6.3 million students were enrolled in California's K-12 public schools, taught by more than 300,000 teachers. There are more than 10,000 schools governed by 1,000 school districts. If you look at the chart on your right, about 1/10, 11% of the students are with IEP. About 1/5, 22% of the teachers are K-12 students are EL students. More than half, 58% of the students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. In 16-17, the graduation rate was 82%. In this chart, we are going to look at some of the gender and ethnicity distribution of our California public school teachers. The bar chart on your left, you can see the gender distribution stayed fairly steady. In 16-17, 73% teachers were female, 27% were male, and it was the same 7 years ago, about the same, very steady pattern. When we look at the race and ethnicity, in 16-17, 63% identified themselves as white, 20% Hispanic, and 8% Asians. If you look at the composition in 2010-11, 67% identified themselves as white, 17% Hispanic, and 7% Asian. So that's a small uptick in the non-white teachers of color in the past 7 years. In this chart, we would like to show the current teaching workforce next to our current students. If you look at the pie chart on your left, that is the race ethnicity distribution of our K-12 students, more than half, 54% of our K-12 students are Hispanic, followed by 25% white. And if you look at the race ethnicity, the pie chart on your right, it is almost flipped. 63% of our teachers were white, followed by 20% Hispanic. So though we saw a small uptick in the race and ethnicity in the previous chart, the teacher workforce has a long ways to go before we will look like our K-12 students. In this bar chart, we are showing the distribution of our current teachers by number of teaching experience, years experience. About 20% had less than 4 years of teaching experience, another 15% between 5 and 9 years of experience, and another 19% 10 to 14 years. So if you add the first three bar chart, 55% of the teachers had less than 15 years of experience. Another 45 had more than 15%. Now we'll move on to our teacher preparation and the new teachers we studied in this pilot. This table is to show the 4 different segments who prepare teachers, as well as some characteristics of the 12-13 cohort teachers. California State University's 23 campuses, they produce more than 5,500 teachers. In the teacher supply report, we usually talk about number of credentials. Since this is an employment and a retention pattern, we are following unique teachers. So these are teachers. And the median age of CSU teachers was 28, and they had 40% of teachers of color, 26% were male teachers. Moving on to University of California, 8 campuses, they produce 847 teachers prepared in 12-13. Younger teachers with a median age of 25. Half of the teachers were teachers of color, and 1/4, 24% were male teachers. Moving on to private independent institutions, 48 institutions prepared new teachers. More than 4,800 teachers were prepared by private and independent institutions. The median age was 30, slightly older than UC and CSU. 39% were teachers of color, 28% were male teachers. Moving on to local education agency, we had 9 entities. They prepared more than 300 teachers. It's a smaller segment. The older teachers, the median age was 36. 1/3 of the teachers were teachers of color, and 1/3 were male teachers. The last column is a statewide numbers. We had 88 teacher preparation institutions who prepared teachers. They prepared 11,525. This is our cohort studied in this pilot. The median age was 29. 40% of the teachers were teachers of color. 27 teachers were male. This pie chart is to show the proportion of teachers prepared in 12-13. As you can see, more than about half of the teachers were prepared by CSU. They are the biggest segment. Followed by 43% were prepared by private independent institutions. 7% of the teachers were prepared by University of California. The remainder 2% by LEA. This stacked bar chart is to show the different emphasis by different segment. If you look at CSU, they had 41% of the teachers were prepared in multiple subject, 37% in single subject, and the remainder 22% in special education. If you move to the University of California, the big focus is on single subject. More than half, 56% of the new teachers were trained in single subject. Private independent institution had about 1/3, equal distribution, 1/3 in multiple subject, another 1/3 in single subject, and about 1/3 in education specialist. Local education agency, here you can see the focus is on special education. About 2/3 of the teachers were prepared in special education. Now we will move on to the data. We use the data sources, the methodology, and analysis. Data sources, Commission's Credential Data System has number of credentials issued. The fiscal year or the school year starts from July 1 through June 30. So that is the Commission's fiscal year. And we also know who prepared these teachers. We have 4 segments, 3 IHEs, CSU, UC, private, independent, and LEAs. We also know the Commission's data system has information on type of teaching credential, multiple single and education specialist, what subjects the teachers are authorized to teach. CDE's employment data has information when this teacher was employed. They take census in the first Wednesday in October. So if the teacher is in the data set, the teacher is employed. The data set also has name of the school site, name of the school district, and county. We also have the 14-digit CDS code. There's also information on the demographic variables such as gender, ethnicity, age, educational level, years in teaching, and years in the same district. And this also has information on the assignments that teachers are teaching. The data from the Commission's accreditation, the data from the credential system was merged with the CDE's employment data using one unique ID. I would say this is the most complicated, time-consuming process in this entire process. First of all, the data sets were huge. There are multiple years, so we wanted to make sure the data, the file format, the naming convention of the data fields, missing data fields, and this multiple years worth of data. So we had to make sure whether the data are coming out fine. Each year, there were 300,000 teachers, so that's a huge file. And the Commission issues more than about 250,000 documents. Bigger proportions are teaching documents. So just to get the handle on the data set, bringing them in before we could start the analysis, we did a lot of data quality, data validation. So I would say that was a big challenge, but we did learn a lot about our data system. Methodology and data analysis, as I mentioned, we followed the new teachers who were prepared in 12-13 as the base year. This was almost like a cohort model. We followed the same teachers for the next 5 years to see the employment and retention pattern. We wanted to see how many teachers got job in the same year they got credential, that is year 1. Then we wanted to see how many teachers were employed in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. Once they were employed, how many teachers were retained? They were stayed employed, and did the pattern differ by type of teaching credential? And we also looked at the mobility of our teachers. Before I get into the analysis and findings, I just wanted to mention the limitation to this pilot. As I mentioned, it's a beginning of our analysis. We are still fine-tuning our process and methodology. Data are maintained between 2 different state agencies. We have the credential data, and CDE has the employment data. So the timing, needed a lot of interagency cooperation. The employment data set does not include teachers who are teaching in private school or teachers moved out of state. The data set includes only people who are in the public schools. So the employment rate and retention rate could be underreported because there is no way for us to follow them. Commission's database is type of data on teaching credentials. So this analysis is at the credential level. We did not analyze at the subject area level, because there is no crosswalk between the Commission subject area and CDE's employment data set. For example, we use 4 different codes for single subject in math credential. The employment data set has more than 60 codes. So our assignment staff, they are building this crosswalk or the mapping. Once that is done, we'll be able to do more analysis using the subject area. Other factors such as housing, salary, transportation, location, school characteristics, they will have an impact on this employment and retention, but we don't have that information available in the data warehouse yet. So out of the 11,525 teachers, 9,600 of the teachers were employed in the 5 years. So we wanted to see how these new teachers look in comparison to the entire teaching workforce. If you look at the donut chart on the left, that is our new teachers, and the donut chart on the right is our entire current teaching workforce. The gender distribution identical, exactly the same. So there's not much difference in the gender makeup of our new teachers and current teaching workforce. 73% female, 27% male. When we looked at the race, ethnicity of our new teachers with our current teachers, slight variation. If you look at the pie, 58% identify themselves as white in 12-13, the new cohort, and our current teaching workforce, 62%. As we said, there was a little bit of an uptick in the race and ethnicity. Maybe that's reflected here. The Title II enrollment also indicates in most recent year, more than half of our teacher candidates are teachers of color. So we are making some progress in that area. This employment data set also has the information on the educational level of our teachers. So we also looked at the education level of our new teachers with our current teachers. If you look at the first two bar, about 2/3 of the new teachers had bachelor degree or bachelor plus 30 units, and the 1/3 had master and higher degree. When you look at the bar chart on the right, current teachers, about 56% had bachelor plus 30 units, and the rest of them had higher degree. It's since it's evident that there are experienced teachers in the current teaching workforce. So now we'll start into the analysis. So first we started some employment rate by gender. As you can see, the employment rate was different by gender. There was a 5 percentage points between male and female teachers. Male teachers are hired at a higher rate. So then we wanted to tease down this data. Is there a difference between gender and credential? As you can see, there's 2 bars in the middle, the single subject pretty much identical, like 76% versus 75%. If you look at the education specialist, there was a difference of 5 percentage points between female and male teachers. And the biggest difference was seen at the multiple subject teachers, about 15 percentage points. Then we wanted to look at the employment rate by race and ethnicity. Not a lot of difference, but a range 74% for Asian Pacific Islander to 83% for African American. Here I wanted to add a caveat. This data was self-reported, race and ethnicity and gender, and there was a lot of missing data. And sometimes the teacher checked Hispanic in year 1, and then later it was 2 or 3 races, so there's no consistency. So we had to use the most recent year for this analysis. Since we had the age data, we wanted to look at them if the employment rate, did it vary by age groups. We put the age in 5 different buckets with 10 years of interval, starting from 25 to 34, all the way to 65 to 74. And then we looked at them by credential, regardless of the age range in every single grouping. If you can see, the gray bar stands out because the teachers with special education credential, they were hired at a higher rate in the 70% range, followed by a 60% range for single subject, then about a 50% range for multiple subject. So then we wanted to look at the employment pattern. How do this new cohort of teachers, how are they getting their, when are they employed? In year 1 or in subsequent years? If you look at the bottom bar, all teaching credential, 23% of the teachers were employed in year 1, the same year they got the credential. Another 40% were employed in year 2, 13% in year 3, another 5% in year 4, and 2% in year 5. So then we wanted to look at the employment pattern. Did it vary by credential? So if you look at the top bar, for multiple subject, 14% were employed in the same year, year 1, followed by 41% in year 2. I'm just looking at year 1 and 2. For single subject, 20% were employed in year 1, 44% in year 2. But the big difference is the education specialist credential holders. 44% of the teachers were employed in year 1 and 31% in year 2. So overall, about more than 70% of the teachers were employed by at the end of year 2. So just to summarize the overall cumulative employment rate by type of teaching credential, for multiple subject, it was about 80%, 79.5%, 84% for single subject, 89% for education specialist credential. When we combined all teaching credential, it was 84% of the teachers were employed. So moving on to the retention pattern and by type of credential, this is a cohort model. We are following this 9,600 teachers who got jobs between 12-13 and 16-17. And within that, each year, we had to almost follow like a mini sub-cohort. So this is the 2,700 teachers who got job in year one, the same year they got the credential. So we are following the same 2,700 teachers. So that was a retention of 93% between year 1 and 2, 94% retention rate between year 2 and 3, and 95% between 3 and 4 and 5. So the attrition rate varied between 5 to 7%. So we are retaining about 90% of the teachers, and it did vary by the type of teaching credential. So we wanted to make sure whether the same pattern follows for the next sub-cohort, so who got employed in year 2. There were 4,700 teachers who were employed in year 2, and they had similar patterns. More than 90% of the teachers were retained between each year. So the overall retention was about 90%, and the attrition rate varied between 6 to 7 in the earlier years, between 3 and 4 in most recent years. Then we wanted to look at the teachers. Now we know that we have the 5 years worth of employment data. We wanted to look at them by bins, how many teachers were employed only for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4, and 5 years. Again, the teachers who were employed for 1 year, it didn't vary much by type of credential, 6 to 7%, they taught only 1 year. Then if you combine the first 3 sets of data, about 1/3 taught employed between 1 and 3 years, and that about 2/3 were employed between 4 and 5 years. Again, the differences, multiple subject and single subject beginning to look kind of the same in year 4, exactly the same. But education specialist, about like a 71, 72% taught between 4 and 5 years. This is kind of hard to see, but we just wanted to show, we know how many teachers are employed and how many are retained, and we wanted to show where exactly these employed teachers. So there are 2 maps. If you look at the first map on your left-hand side, as in the beginning I mentioned, there are 88 teacher preparation program institutions who prepare teachers. This is the distribution of our 88 teacher preparation program. Unfortunately, we don't have a legend. The dark blue is UC campuses, light blue is CSU, red is private independent institutions, and the orange is LEAs. As you can see, a lot of clustering around the southern region, near Los Angeles, San Diego region, followed by Bay Area. Another interesting point is, out of the 88 teacher preparation institutions, they are located in 29 of the 58 counties. Then on the map on your right-hand side, this is the distribution of the new teachers who are employed. You can see the color gradation between the dark green to light green and kind of a yellowish green. Again, you can see the big clustering around Los Angeles County, in the Inland Empire area, San Diego area, and followed by the Bay Area. So when we analyze them by individual teacher preparation program, pretty much very high proportion of teachers were employed in the same county where the teacher preparation program was located. And another point here was, sorry, I had to bring this PowerPoint again. The 9,600, sorry. I'll keep talking when they're trying to bring this up. Audiovisual is always a challenge. The other thing, the 88 teacher preparation programs, they were located only in 29 counties, half of the 58 counties, whereas the 9,600 teachers, they were employed in 56 of the 58 counties, except Sierra and Alpine counties, because usually there is no estimated teacher hire in these two counties as well. The other interesting part we thought was, as part of the teacher supply report, we also analyzed estimated teacher hires by county. The same counties had the same number of teachers. Should I stop or?
Online though, right?
Mm-hmm. Could I ask just a quick question about the retention slide that you had so that I understand that? On the retention slide, did that mean retained in the same position or retained in terms of continuing to be employed as a teacher?
They're in the employed data set. We don't know whether they're in the same position because that is not available in the employment data set.
Okay. So I'm not looking at it now, but in that one, it looked like by year 4, 40 to 50% of the individuals in the cohort continued to be employed as a teacher?
It's a higher percentage.
Or 50, 65? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I can just look at that.
One thing we'll want to talk about later, this was such a great presentation about our new methodology and data. That was a very unusual year because that's when the layoffs were going on. So from 2012 to 2015, we had most beginning teachers had a hard time getting jobs, and then and you can see special ed teachers had an easier time because there was a shortage even back then. But there were layoffs, across the state. So the actual numbers are going to look real different today than they would have looked, back then. But it's great. But the methodology will allow us to now track this.
Distributed in 29 counties, whereas the newly employed teachers were employed in 56 of the 58 counties except Sierra and Alpine. And just to summarize the employed teachers by county, 22% of the teachers were employed in Los Angeles County because we have a very high percentage of teacher preparation programs in that county. The following 4 counties, San Diego, Orange, Santa Clara, and Alameda, employed another 26% of the new teachers. And the following 5 counties, San Bernardino, Riverside, Fresno, Contra Costa, and Sacramento, employed another 21%. So together, these 10 counties employed 69% of the new teachers. And another 19% were employed by another 10 counties, and the rest of the 12% were employed by another 36 counties. The numbers range from 2,100 from Los Angeles to 2 for Mono County. And another interesting point I want to make here, the CDE publishes estimated teacher hires every year. We do analyze the data by county and the subject area. The same 10 counties, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Bernardino, Alameda, Santa Clara, Riverside, Orange, Contra Costa, and Sacramento, Fresno, they accounted for 70% of the estimated teacher hires. So you can see the parallel patterns. Now we are moving into the mobility. How many teachers stay in the same county, in the same district and same school? Stay means they're within the 5-year data set. They're staying within the same county. So we started with the county level. 84% of the teachers were employed in the same county, and 16% moved between more than one county. Then we wanted to drill down at the district level. 70% of the teachers were employed in the same district, and 30% were moved. They moved in between the districts. Then we drilled down at the next level at the school site. 52% of the teachers stayed in the same school site, whereas 48% moved between the school site. CDE Data Coast has 2 data points. They asked the teachers or educators average years in teaching, that was 14 years. Average years in district is 12 years. Teachers like to stay, but probably not in the same district, so they move between the schools and intern in the school district. So we had lots of charts and graphs to summarize our findings. Initial employment rate of new teachers varied by gender, ethnicity, age, and the biggest difference variation was by type of teaching credential. Employment pattern of new teachers also varied by teaching credential, as we saw 80% for multiple subject to 89% for special education, with the overall 84% statewide, right? Once employed, more than 90% of the teachers stayed employed for the next 3 to 5 years. When we looked at the mobility, 70% of the teachers stayed within the same district, and more than 80% of the teachers stayed employed in the same county. So what we see, the best practices is teacher preparation program institutions continue to work with the local education agencies. So as soon as the program completers finish the credential program, they can be employed by the local local LEAs. Employ new teachers, and most likely they will stay. This is, again, we are looking at 11,000 teachers who are prepared in 12-13 and for 5 years. But we can see a trend, they are staying for the 5 years. Prepare your own teachers locally. As I mentioned, very high proportion of the teachers are taking the job in the same county where the teacher preparation program is located. So grow your own. We also saw the employment rate was higher for special education, followed by single subject. So we encourage teacher candidates to get credential in the teacher shortage areas such as math, science, and special education. What is our next goal, our possible next steps? As we get the employment data, we will continue to update the employment rate and retention rate. We will continue to fine-tune, refine our process and methodology, how we are bringing. We also wanted to make sure another next 2 cohorts are following the same pattern. Just want to make sure they have similar patterns. We saw the attrition for the cohort of new teachers. We wanted to develop a methodology if we can find the attrition rate for all our 300,000 teachers at the statewide level. And again, once we have the fine-tuned our methodology, and then we thought we will provide this information back to the teacher preparation institution so they can be used in accreditation process or as a feedback mechanism. That way they know where their program completers are employed. Once we have information or finalized, analyzed, we thought we will publish the statewide data in the form of data dashboards. As I mentioned, this is our initial attempt, I will say a pilot project. We are very happy with the analysis, but we will continue to bring other factors, school characteristics, and see whether this employment and retention pattern vary with other factors. I'll be happy to answer any questions at this point.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. We will now open for public comments. I have one public comment card. Will Rigel Massaro please come up? State your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Rigel Massaro with Public Advocates. I wasn't feeling so well yesterday, but I had to get here today to see this. It's really, really exciting. I think this is the first ever kind of cohort analysis that the Commission has been able to do, and I want to really appreciate the initiative and the prompt and thorough work that's been done. I think this is pursuant to the MOU that is just quite recent, so that we're just months later being presented with this rich data is incredible. It's really exciting. I'm not satisfied with those words to emphasize how excited I am, but I am excited. I think I have 3 things to say. One is that we'd be really thrilled to see the equity lens even further strengthened in these analyses. And so I really appreciated the slide on mobility, and we can see mobility is highest between schools. We know that schools with high need students tend to deal with the highest teacher turnover. And so fleshing that out more, deciding on kind of we could look at the cutoff of 55% or whatever we wanted to choose, but looking and seeing, is it really our high need students, as I would guess, that are suffering most from teacher turnover and churn? Second, I think giving some serious thought. I know it's contentious, but giving some serious thought to making this data local and usable. I look at a lot of LCAPs, and every year districts are spending, especially high-need districts, are spending millions of dollars, and this is sometimes just the supplemental and concentration funds they're reporting on recruiting and retaining teachers. And they're going abroad, and they're going to other states. They're investing a lot of money. And a lot of them don't have this kind of data sets and analyses to assess whether their efforts are working. And I think this, being able to drill down and provide to districts this information would be tremendously helpful in their own efforts to spend their precious dollars wisely and to reduce teacher turnover and better support the teachers in their district. And then third, I would just be thrilled to sit down with commission staff and stakeholders and think about what other analyses would be really useful. We've surfaced so many questions at this table that we'd like to know, that I think this data makes now possible. And so I would really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and kind of flesh out what is everything we could know with this data, and then what is the priority, and how do we want to know it. Again, I would proffer with a strong equity focus and with some level of local data. Has the tremendous power to change our state policymaking and the local budgeting. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Seeing no other comment cards, the public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Commissioner Hartwig.
Thank you. Yes, in fact, my question follows on Ms. Massaro's question. I was interested in the data about movement between schools. And so I was curious, the data that you've collected, does that include information about why the moves were made? I'm sure you have thought about that, but I was very curious if they were voluntary, someone chose to move, or whether it was need-based. And then I was also interested in the same question that Ms. Massaro brought up about whether we've been able to slice and dice the moves vis-a-vis what we know about high-need schools.
One of the limitations I should have mentioned, these are all quantitative data. It's all numbers, so we really do not know why the teachers aren't employed, why they're leaving. So that is the whys and the reasons are missing in this data set. That will make it so rich to analyze it. NCS does, every 4 years, they do the staffing survey. I think the last one was done in 11-12. 3.3 million teachers were, got information. Then the following year, they do a follow-up. They take a subsample to find out why the teachers are leaving. So we don't have that right now. We don't have that reasoning behind this employment and unemployed teachers leaving or moving. So that piece, we don't have this in the data set right now. And the school characteristics, that is also a challenge, because just to bring them into the data warehouse, because that is where we can bring non-identifiable data so that we can analyze the data, slicing and dicing. We tried, because again, the data set is so huge, we wanted to make sure before we bring the school characteristics, they're all nice and clean. So we are working on it. We have a long wish list. It's just the tip of the iceberg. We wanted to get a big statewide picture. Then as we refine it, we'll be able to bring more factors and slice and dice, and why the teachers are moving, or at least able to answer some questions, whether the location, whether the school characteristics, the student population. So we definitely will be looking at that.
Commissioner Klatt, followed by Wall.
Thank you so much. And I want to echo Rigel Massaro's enthusiasm. We've talked about the attrition issue for so long, and to finally have the data is really exciting, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Along those lines, I also want to add another kind of item to the wish list, I guess, of where we go with this. When we were considering the education specialist credential structure a while back, one of the things on the table was whether or not to have grade bands. And I think the feedback we received was that it might make it even harder to find education specialists if we narrowed those bands. And I'm wondering if there's a point at which we can use this data to look at the retention of educational specialists, especially around the primary high school, that divide. And I know just anecdotally, but I don't have any data, that sometimes, especially in K-12 districts, teachers get placed in the high school and they're not happy there and they leave, and that there's a lot more turnover perhaps, and again, this is anecdotal, I don't know, a lot more turnover in high school special education departments because of that sort of unhappiness with being placed in high school when that's not where they wanted to be. So I'm just curious if at some point along the line we can use this to further explore the attrition rate in special education and to see if it's grade related or not. And beyond that, like I said, this is such exciting data. So thank you so much for the presentation.
As we are learning about this employment data set, what we can do. So definitely, this is almost like we're already talking about, we will have where the teachers are prepared, where they're employed, where they're moving, where they're misassigned. We can do it so many ways, as we bring more data into the data warehouse. So definitely we'll be looking at that.
Do you want to say something?
It wouldn't be a commission meeting if I didn't get to come up to the table an extra time. So this is work that Marjorie is passionate about. We have a little data unit, which also includes Fifi Lau. We're not funded to do this work. This goes above and beyond what we are legislatively required to do in the teacher supply report, although our executive director is definitely pushing us to do more of this work. The thing is, we have to fit it in around the sides of the work we have to be doing. So we need to continue working with the administration and make sure that they understand that this is valued and that the community of educators feel it's valued. So maybe we could get a little more support to allow us to do more of this work.
Thank you. Commissioner Wall, followed by Chair Darling Hammond.
So I just want to say what tremendous work this is. I happen to have done a study just like this in another state, and so I have real knowledge of the true complexity that exists and how the questions we ask, actually turning them into real data is very time-consuming and complex. We hand-matched, to give you an example of how complex it was. So I really appreciate that. I have a very technical point. On your map that talks about privates, can I emphasize that the privates have all these regional locations that aren't fully represented on that map, which I think is important if you think about placement of programs and this idea of local grow your own. And then I'd make a methodological point, which is we found it incredibly valuable for stakeholders to do this in GIS. And to move the methodology to mapping and overlapping mapping as a means to display to people the information in a different way than graphs can display. So if you ever wanted to talk about that, I'd happily talk with you about using GIS as a methodology.
That's also on our wish list. We are actually looking at analyzing what type of a GIS software will be good for the commission, so we can bring all this lat long and map exactly. And that's also another effort. We did collect the information on satellite campuses, because we do have a number of private institutions have satellite institutions, so we should be able to map everybody. Thank you, and definitely we'll pick your brain. We'll talk later.
Chair Darling Hammond, followed by Vice Chair Hind.
Commissioner Wall's comments and some of the others make me think about how much this group is ready to geek out on this with Marjorie. And Rigel started us off that way. So anyway, we're all excited about it and recognize how much challenge there is in doing this work. I just wanted to think aloud about the question of, could we know why people leave? And of course, that requires surveys. So the data that we typically look at across the country comes from, there's a national survey that comes out every couple of years, and they do ask teachers if they've left, why they left, and so on. But one thing that we might think about, and I don't want to overload our 2 years out survey, but we could ask one question potentially that just says, if you've changed schools, to note that, and then just a list of, what check off, what were the reasons. So there are ways to maybe think about modest investments that could get us a little bit of data on questions like that. Otherwise, we'd have to mount a statewide survey, and that's also potentially possible, but it is much more expensive and so on. But it would be great for us to have yet another session on this where we really could think together both about the analyses we'd like to eventually have and perhaps the ways that we can get the investments to make that possible. And thanks very much for the good work on this.
Vice Chair Hind, followed by Commissioner Sloan.
I just wanted to add under the best practices list that you had, I don't know if you didn't collect the data, but I'm sure that we all can agree that mentoring and in those first couple of years is probably one of the keys to keeping those teachers in their positions. So,
Commissioner Sloan, followed by Brown.
This is an exciting time for geeking out. And sorry, I'm catching a cold here. I know that, we know that we have been all working towards doing something similar. And at points we have mentioned that the UCs have put together a multi-campus collaborative on developing a data system that we can also, similar to this, that we could answer some pending questions that we've had for a long time. And so we have worked closely with Terry and Executive Director Sandy and others about what are the kinds of questions that CTC has that we can support and help with. We have a stakeholder advisory group. Many people in this room are on that, who are tasked with helping us with the kinds of questions that we might utilize in understanding the kinds of things that we need to understand in the state for us here at the Commission and other policymakers. And I think it's exciting because we're at a place where now the Commission has CTC and CDE have developed their MOU. Our MOU between UC, CTC, and CDE is in process. We have our state IRB finished and approved, et cetera. So we're also ready. We have on our advisory committee somebody else who has set up two state systems. But now that I know Andrew has also done that. So it seems like we're at a place where we could really collaborate on actually getting something done now and figure out what CTC can do, what the UC Center can do, how we bring our stakeholders together to help us inform those questions, as Rigel Massaro suggested. And this is a very exciting time, and I look forward to what we do next.
We are definitely looking forward to it because there's two of us working on it because we want to know, kind of brainstorming what other things we can be looking at it. So definitely we'll be working together on it.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
We are at a time and a place where we were not only very ready for this, but really excited about what we're seeing. And it brings up more questions. I was looking in particular to best practices. And I just wanted to bring this up now because this is the first time we're looking at this. The one that says prepare your own teachers locally makes really good sense on the surface. I want us to look deeper because there's a lot of places that don't have institutions of higher education locally. And if we overfocus on this, we will miss a lot of the state, or we risk that. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I'm thinking about how the regional areas the regional pieces you were talking about, Andrew, but I just want us to think about that as we look at this. And then the last one about encouraging candidates to get teaching credentials in teacher shortage areas, again, that makes sense, but let's be careful we don't rob Peter to pay Paul. So as we emphasize some areas, we don't want to do that at the expense of all the areas of teacher education that need to be, that still will need teachers. So those were just my two questions about those best practices.
We were mostly looking at the statewide, but back to Andrews, we will be bringing all the satellite locations. We also, out of curiosity, we looked at it. A couple of big private universities who had a number of satellite. So this one university had teachers employed in 47 of the 58 counties. So, yeah.
Commissioner Sloan, then Olive.
I did have a quick question about the same issue with respect to tracking which institutions candidates come from and where they go. And when you did this analysis of where most people are hired and where most of the institutions are, was it an analysis that actually tracked from the institution to where they're hired, or was it just the concentration of institutions and the concentration of hires?
We started from where they were prepared.
So explain again.
We know where the teacher is getting the teaching credential, and we also know where they're employed.
So you tracked them from where they got their credential to where they are employed.
Yes, we did it by institution. We didn't present it that way. We presented it at a statewide level, but we actually looked at UC Santa Barbara and their completers and where they actually all went. And if it was in the same county, they got counted in the count. So we didn't, of course, have time to present all of that because it's very deep as soon as you start going. But yes, we have that ability if we just had the time and people to do it.
I think that's very exciting and helpful for the reasons that we had mentioned here at the table to understand where they go. Thank you.
Commissioner Olive.
Thank you. I know you get this information from the California Department of Education that you matched with. Do they get this information from the districts? And I only ask that because your donut chart where you showed whether they were staying in the same schools, the same districts, et cetera. We track that district, that information, and I think most districts do within their own organizations. We know how many teachers, for instance, were involuntarily transferred or not, or, are transferred for other reasons. So we keep that information. So would that be information that would then be sent to the CDE? Well, is that information you could get from go back to the districts? Because I don't think that particular piece is that hard to get since we do it anyway.
So this, the thing about data is that it awakens the researcher in all of us. and there are so many rabbit holes we'd like to jump down. And I am right at the head of the line, eager to do that. What I'd like to do is bound this again, if I can, to what it is we're doing. We produce and report for the public and to the legislature a teacher supply report every year that has big numbers in big categories, and invariably we have some form of the same conversation at this table about it, where we're looking for how, what more can we know about these big numbers in big categories. So what we are doing in this process right now is trying to refine our understanding of what teacher supply and attrition look like within the sectors that we oversee. We see this potentially, if this methodology is workable and we can manage it as a next section of our teacher supply report in the future, something that we can report annually on. But there are going to be myriad ways in which some of the questions that we'd like to pursue are outside the scope of this agency and its work, but certainly within the scope of other entities to follow up on. So it's our hope that this becomes a source to refine a larger research agenda within the state to better understand mobility within the teaching force, which is, I think, a critical conversation to have as we see the growing shortages, investment strategies coming from the legislature about how to stimulate recruitment. All of this is going to help us understand how to better manage policy and investment around the teacher preparation and production lines, if you will. So I'm excited to see all of the excitement in the room about this. Coming from me, restraint is a little bit surprising for the staff because I kind of want to run after this right down but I would like to kind of keep us in our lane, if you will, and understand this as a deeper understanding of the supply work that we track for the state.
Executive Director Sandy, could I offer that if any commissioner has an interest in talking about this more, if you would contact me, Marjorie and I will set up a phone call with you and we could have a conversation on your questions and see if we can bring them into our work environment, because we'd be thrilled to talk with you about it. But I do know we need to move on soon to the next item.
We have Chair Darlene Hammond and Commissioner Redmond.
I love that offer. Thank you very much. And it might be nice actually to, there might be several of us who want to have a conversation to put us all together in a conversation, so that
as long as there's not more than 8.
Exactly. Yes.
I was
about to say that, as long as we don't violate any of the aggregation rules. But that would be a great conversation. I think people would think together. The other thing that the commission can do now, there's an MOU between the commission and the CDE for those data sets that to connect, and CDE can manage those being accessed, is identify questions that maybe there's not staffing to do inside the commission, but that you want to encourage others to do, both in the UC consortium and others in the state. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the points that were made. About your point, Commissioner Brown, that we have to worry about the parts of the state that don't have schools of education in them, and I think that's a really important point. I think there was a report that came out recently that said, well, we should put more schools of education in the parts of the state that are having shortages. Well, that's not a simple thing to do, right? But we also then need to encourage incentives to attract people once they have been prepared to the places where the jobs are, and that's often the way one designs things like service scholarships or other, place-based incentives, and it's something that the commission can think about as we are administering the local solution grants and other strategies that the state is taking up. So it would be nice to see we should think about how to inform the incentives that we're now able to try to administer by virtue of seeing where the shortages are. LPI did a study for the Getting Down to Facts set of studies on this topic, and we did find that most of the most acute shortages were in rural areas, which I think is part of what you're saying. Then the next most acute shortages were in poor, low-income urban areas. So, finding those ways to get people from where they are to where they're needed. As of this year, the most recent data, we found that the attrition rate in California, the annual attrition rate, is about 8.5%. People leaving teaching and or the state, and another 8% of people switching schools. So at the school level, that means on average you might have about 16% of people turning over in a year. It's a pretty substantial turnover rate to manage. But the turnover rate was much, much higher for teachers who were classified in the system as not highly qualified, which means emergency permits and waivers. And the turnover rate for folks in self-contained settings who are not highly qualified, which generally means education specialist teachers, because there are relatively few elementary teachers who are not fully qualified, was 30%. So part of our supply challenge is retention, and it's great that we'll be able to kind of calculate these survival analyses, as they call them, regularly and tie them to the credential types as well as the places, and start to think about them. What are the policy incentives that we need to keep people, keep schools well staffed? So I know we're not going to geek out anymore. Terry's going to now convene us so we can have these conversations.
Commissioner Redmond.
I'm just curious about on this. What are the bounds that you talked about, or really my point is that there were a lot of the core of the question, especially that started with Ms. Massaro, was around kind of a deeper equity analysis, and I don't know I guess I'm unsure about what is within the bounds and outside of the bounds of what we can do going forward. I guess I'm asking Mary.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would like to get back to you on that. We are framing this work as living inside our mandate to report on teacher supply and demand, which we do every year. And we believe a critical variable in understanding supply and demand is understanding employment and retention rates. So at a minimum, providing that level of texture, we believe is a necessary part of doing an adequate job of reporting on the teacher supply. I think that there are ways to get deeper in understanding those trends by looking at it through an equity lens, by looking at it through, a regional lens. There are a number of lenses that could be applied to it. And I think sticking within the bounds of a better understanding of supply and demand and the mobility that impacts that, that's the broad boundary that I'm aware of. So beyond that, I think it's specific questions that are of interest. We can evaluate against that and evaluate against our ability to conduct that type and level of analysis within the resources we have. So I think this is the beginning of something that we would like to be able to be an authoritative resource for the state on within our teacher supply work, but we are going to continue to explore the ground and the bounds. And, if there is interest in expanding our ability to do that, that's something we can explore with the administration and the legislature if we need to.
Do any other commissioners have any questions or comments at this time on this item? Okay, seeing no other questions. This is an information item, so no action is needed at this time. Thank you, Ms. Suko. Having no additional items, I adjourn the Education Preparation Committee.
Thank you. Next is the Professional Practice Committee. Commissioner Cooney, will you please convene the committee?
Good morning. I will convene the Professional Practices Committee. We have 3 items to address today. Item 4A is the regular review of the workload report, and then we have 2 additional items for our consideration. Gil Gonzalez is here, the manager of Professional Practices Division. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here to present the monthly workload report, which is an informational item. To increase its oversight of the work of the Division of Professional Practices, in 2011, the Commission directed staff to present information about DPP's workload as part of the agenda, Commission's agenda. The report consists of 6 key measurements for both current and prior years for comparison purposes. And I will highlight the stats for the October 2018 workload report. The total cases are the number of open cases within DPP, including cases in intake before the Committee of Credentials, pending before the Commission, and pending an administrative hearing. At the end of October, we had a total caseload of 2,954, which is significantly above the normal range of 2,600 to 2,800 cases, and well above the prior normal range of 2,400 to 2,600. Cases open are the new cases received during the month from all sources, including criminal arrest notices, district reports, affidavits, and educators who self-report. In October, staff opened 542, which is above the normal average of 400 to 500 cases. And this is the 3rd month in a row that we've been above that range. The number of cases reviewed by the Committee of Credentials during its 3-day meeting can be seen in the next 2 graphs titled Initial Review Cases and Formal Review Cases. The 2-step process is required by statute. We had a normal caseload of 90 cases that we were doing, and we've increased it to 105. In October, the committee reviewed 106 cases. Cases closed is the number of matters closed during the month. Our normal range, again, is 400 to 500 cases, and we closed 464. AG cases refer to the cases in which the educator requested an administrative hearing to challenge the recommendation for discipline by the committee. The current number is 165 cases for October. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? We don't have a public comment card. Is there any public comment? Not seeing any. Commissioners, questions? Most of you are used to these terms for the various cases we track, but some new commissioners may have questions. Appreciate, Mr. Gonzalez, you including the definitions in a separate page of the item so that we can all review exactly what we're concerned about. But it's obvious from new cases opened and also a number of cases being considered by the Committee of Credentials that there are substantial increases.
Right. The workload has increased the last few months. We're managing as best as possible, but we're always looking at ways to streamline that process.
Commissioner Hyde.
Kind of curious about, you said the workload's increased, there's a lot more cases opened. Do you think more people are reporting, or do you think that crime is up, or what do you think is?
A lot of it's been based on applications, so I think applications are up, and first-time applicants has been an issue for us, so that's where it's coming from.
Any other questions from commissioners or comments?
I have a comment, which is I'm very pleased to see our other agenda item that we're going to be discussing about how to make it possible to keep up in a professional, ethical, legal way with our obligations, given this rising caseload that we also talked about in the September agenda item. So thank you for all the work that I know has gone into the other agenda item we're going to talk about.
It's always a concern, so we're always looking into ways to fix that, so that'll be one of them.
Anybody else? Okay, Mr. Gonzalez, thank you very much. We next have item 4B, which is a review and action item. We need to look at the expirations of some of the Committee of Credentials members for the fiscal year 2019-2020, and we have from our legal staff, Ms. Ani Kindle, to present the item.
Good morning. The committee is comprised of 7 members. They are determined by statute to be 1 elementary school member, 1 secondary school member, 1 school board member, 1 administrator, and 3 public members. Currently, the terms of our school administrator, Dr. Helio Brazil, and our secondary teacher, Sheila Rice-Camp, will expire June of 2019. These 2 members have already served the maximum number of terms and cannot be reappointed. We also have one of our public members, Ms. Ellen Gervais, whose term will also expire in June of 2019. She has indicated that she is willing to serve again. This would be her 3rd term if she's reappointed. Staff is asking that you declare the 3 vacancies and is asking also that you reappoint Ms. Gervais to the position of public member. In addition, for the school board member, for the administrator position and for the secondary teacher position, we have a pool of applicants that have been previously selected by the ad hoc committee and approved by the commission to fill vacancies. But staff needs your guidance as to whether we reach out to those folks or whether we reopen the process. And if we reach out to those folks, how do we do that? And I'll be happy to answer questions, but we are also seeking your guidance today as to how to address the 2 vacancies that we have.
I had a question about the alternate pool. With respect to the school administrator position, this is on page 4B2, it indicates that the first name on that list, Mr. Mark Ryan, dates back to 2011. But we have also an additional 5 more recently selected individuals. And so my question is, would the ranking that is listed there and has been done, I presume, by the commission previously, is that something that staff recommends we follow, or is there some reason we depart from that?
We're actually asking your guidance as to whether you would like us to follow that ranking, whether you would like, which works for the administrator position. We don't have ranking for the teacher position. So that's exactly what we would like you to let us know how you would like us to proceed. There is obviously a logic to going with the more recent and the ranking, but we don't want to presume anything.
Okay, great. Do any, we don't have any public comment cards for this item. If there is any member of the public that would like to address it, we'd certainly be open to that. But failing that, we will turn to the Commission and address in order the various items that staff have raised for us. So, and feel free to ask questions of staff with regard to the vacancies, but the initial action is to declare 3 vacancies for the positions that are expiring June 30, 2019. So do we have any discussion on that item? Ms. Klatt? Thank you, Commissioner Klatt. Is there a second? Thank you very much. Okay. We have a motion and a second to declare the 3 vacancies. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. That was item 1. Now, with regard to the one member of the committee who is still eligible to be appointed for a third 2-year term, this is committee member Ellen Gervais. Gervais, okay. I actually have a neighbor who pronounces Gervais, so, you know, I was guessing. Do we have a motion to appoint Ellen Gervais? Thank you very much. And we have a second by Commissioner Hine. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. We have one appointed, and we have one piece of the item left to discuss and decide, and that is how should we advise staff with respect to the forthcoming effort to address the vacancy for one school administrator position and the secondary school position. Commissioners. No, that's all right.
There's one piece of information that I probably should add if you're wondering why it would be difficult to make this decision given that there is a ranking on the most current. The one factor that the ranking doesn't consider is what is the current makeup of the commission geographically by diversity and the like. So if you would want staff to look into that, that's what we would be looking at in going something other than the current ranking on the administrator pool. On the other pool, of course, we don't have any rankings, and we would need your guidance.
Ms. Kendall, from the from that item and your concern with that requirement that we consider such items as the makeup of the committee and the balance throughout the state and so forth, where is that authority based?
It's in Education Code 44240 and also in your policy manual, Section 511.
Okay, great. Commissioner Brown.
So what are those criteria again that you're looking for in terms of balance?
Gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and geographic diversity.
I would encourage us to keep those there, not only because they're statute, but because that gives us a more robust committee. But I'm not sure how that works with these rankings. Thank you for the criteria.
And I don't have that information for you, and we may have the balance we need with the rankings the way they are, but I just wanted to point out why we're asking the question.
The rankings were decided how?
At the time the ad hoc meeting was conducted, the members who participated in the ad hoc committee had a feeling about how they would appoint these folks in that particular order. So it was you kind of liked one person a little tiny bit better than the person ranked slightly below. In some cases, you had to struggle to make those rankings. In other cases, it was more obvious. And then that was given to the commission to adopt. So it was the judgment of the ad hoc committee at the time.
But not necessarily taking into account the various statutory factors.
Actually, I can't speak to that. You may have done that at the time, or you may not have. I don't have that information.
Okay, great. Commissioner Hine.
When you open up, say we have a vacancy and you open it up to the public, how many responses do you typically get back?
It really depends. We have difficulty in some positions. We were very, very fortunate with the administrator position to have received so many. That's very unusual. We're often struggling to fill these positions. So the numbers are usually very small. We are, as directed by the commission, doing year-long ongoing recruiting so that we do have pools of folks that we can reach out to, and we're not waiting for the vacancies to reach out to potential members of the Committee of Credentials. But again, it's a big outreach effort to get folks who are willing to provide the amount of time and effort it takes to work on this particular committee, as you've seen from the numbers of what they have to deal with. And also, because each of these folks, other than the public members, have another position that they work in order to even be eligible for the Committee of Credentials, it's a huge commitment of time and effort from someone who's already a busy person.
Please.
So back to your question of what should we do? I think that it would be beneficial to us, especially under the lens of transparency, to open it back up to any applicants that are interested right now, and then keep in mind still the ones that you have and reach out to those folks as well and say, we have a vacancy. Are you still interested? Is the position in your life still that you can, commit to this? I would hate to not offer it to the public and then to have somebody say, I've been waiting for that spot to open up and I had no idea and now I didn't even have the opportunity. So I think it would be better for us to open it, and then maybe not for a very long time, but that would give our constituent groups time to reach out to their people and say, is there anybody that's interested?
Commissioner Hartwick.
I think my questions were answered about, I was wondering about how the process of selection, but I would second Commissioner Hine's suggestion that if time permitting, so that we can make sure to have continuity, especially given what the workload for the committee is, I agree that it would be helpful to both reach out again to the people who are already in the pool, but also give an opportunity for others to submit applications.
Thank you. Commissioner Klatt.
I have a question about process going forward. So for both the school administrator and secondary teacher position, it looks like the first name in the list is from 2011. But then we must have had to have gone through a process later, because then we have the 2017 and 2018. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of limitation we put, or can we put, when we approve someone to be on the wait list, that there's an expiration date on that? Because I'm comfortable with the wait list if it's something we've looked at in the past year or two, but going back to 2011, things change, and like you said, the composition might have changed, and just so much can change. That is it possible as we go forward to limit the term you can be on the wait list?
We can do whatever the commission directs us to do. We're reluctant to ever take anyone off of the list, because once we find them, we want to be able to reach out to them again. I don't think they would ever be appointed without consultation with the commission, unless we were in a desperate situation. There have been times literally where we have called that month and asked someone, are they still interested and will they serve? Sometimes they remember that they even applied for the position, and other times they do not. I can't speak to, because I picked up this item a little bit late, whether we contacted these two individuals from 2011 and let them know they were going to be on this item. But I know in the past we have done that before we, so that at least they're aware that we're still considering them. And at that point, they could indicate to us that they're not interested. I can't tell you for sure if we did it this time.
Commissioner Hardwick.
One just potential suggestion might be if we put a period, maybe it's more than 3 or 4 years, maybe what we would do instead of just let the candidate go would be ask them to refresh their application. And it was a simple thing that we could do because someone may have gotten a lot of great new experience in the last 5 or 6 years. So that might be an easy thing for us to do.
I might observe that the staff is very competent in the process of searching out and finding candidates for the ad hoc committee and the commission to approve. And I don't think we want to micromanage that particular part of it, but they are asking for help with regard to these lists in particular, and so we need to address whether the rankings have any impact, whether, as Commissioner Hind has suggested, we go beyond the list and encourage staff to open the vacancies to the public, and it appears there's support for that. So let's discuss, or if you're ready, move to advise staff accordingly. Any other comments before we go to a motion? Okay. Commissioner Hind, you were the maker of the suggestion. Would you like to be the maker of a motion?
Sure. So I'll move to open the vacancies to the public. No, they're declared vacant, but...
That's right. We're giving staff guidance as to whether they limit their or first prefer the list they have, or whether they limit it to that.
Staff direction's probably fine.
Okay.
What?
Well, I think we're halfway into it, and
Michael's committed.
well, we haven't had a second to the motion. Let's do that. Then we can discuss it. Commissioner Hartwig, second.
I second the motion.
Commissioner Marks.
Just a simple question, procedural question. When you open this, how long is that process? Knowing that we're up against a timeline of January, I mean,
We would try to come back to you, I think, at the February Commission meeting if there's availability for an ad hoc committee to be formed. So when you make this motion, what you're doing is indicating that there will have to be at least 3 members willing to serve on an ad hoc committee to help us with that selection process. The advantage of the other option would be that you wouldn't need to create another ad hoc committee to do that.
okay. So I'm just, we're not stressing staff with timelines that are unreasonable. Okay.
No, actually, it's the commission members who would have to come.
Well,
we'll be ready for you.
Which is always quite amazing to me. You always are.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? We are advising staff with respect to both positions that we would like to have them open for additional applications, and at staff's direction, we will consider them by our ad hoc process.
And we'll reach out to the existing members on the list to indicate whether they want to be part of that process, yes?
Okay. Commissioner Klatt.
And just for the record, in case any of them are watching or read or look back at this, I just can't, my appreciation that they're even willing to apply, that anyone would be willing to apply to do this work is huge. And so if they're listening, thank you for even being willing to apply.
Okay. No further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Kendall. And thank you for all your good work in advising the committee month after month. Okay, we have one item left, item 4C. And we have a guest to help present this item. This is Linda Snyder, who is from the staff of the Attorney General, Senior Assistant Attorney General for the licensing section. And our own Vanessa Whitnell was also presenting this item, but due to unforeseen circumstances, Ms. Whitnell is not able to attend, so we'll do the best we can with the help of our Executive Director. Welcome, Ms. Snyder.
Thank you very much.
May I begin?
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much, Commissioners. So just by way of review, the Committee of Credentials was established in the Education Code sometime in the early 1970s with the responsibility of reviewing allegations of educator misconduct to determine whether there is probable cause to recommend discipline. It's a 7-member committee. They meet 3 days every single month. And that's been an ongoing and important, critical, central part of our discipline work here at the Commission. Prior to the 2011 Bureau of State audit of our discipline system, we were routinely bringing about 45 new cases to the committee for review each month. Following the audit, some of you who were at the table will recall that we engaged in a systematic overhaul of our procedures, and I think we have implemented every conceivable efficiency to keep that work moving as timely as we possibly can, and have made some great gains in that regard. Initially, as of 2013, we were bringing 90. We doubled the number of cases going before the committee every single month. But as has been indicated by staff in an earlier item, the workload continues to grow, and we have now hit the high mark of 105, and we don't see a decrease in the numbers of open cases coming before the committee in the near future. And that represents a significant issue for us in terms of managing this work and keeping ourselves in equilibrium, and such that we are closing or moving forward as many cases every year as we open. And essentially the conclusion that we are drawing, and we've brought this before you in annual workload reports and in monthly workload reports, the system was not designed to manage this kind of volume. It just wasn't. And the criticality, however, of having educator perspective to bear on parts of the system is, that's written right into the Education Code, but there is a framework of laws that define the procedure that we need to go through that, in addition to our own conclusion that the system needs to be addressed and modified in order to accommodate the kind of volume that we're seeing, we also have been working closely with the Attorney General's office and Linda Schneider in particular to look at what's happening within this framework of laws, and so Linda has done some analysis of that and has some recommendations and findings from her analysis that we'd like to share with you today. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda, and when she's completed her presentation, I'll put a brief closure on the presentation first and turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here today to provide information on this important topic. The last time I was here was about 2 years ago, after the licensing section had assumed the responsibility for the prosecution of the adverse action cases for the Commission, along with the litigation associated with those cases. And since then, we've had the opportunity to litigate cases for the Commission. We've developed strategies to work on them. We've improved our processes, et cetera. And I'm happy to report that in cooperation and collaboration with the Division of Professional Practices, we have been able to bring the caseload into equilibrium. Currently, we have approximately 135 open adverse action cases. When we began 2.5 years ago, we had over 300. So it's work that I'm very proud of, and we've come a long way, but there are other avenues that we can take to make the enforcement program even better. The licensing section also represents about 20 different agencies, licensing agencies within the Department of Consumer Affairs. And we've been doing that work for a very long time. And so we have the perspective to bring to you of the work that we've done for other agencies under different models for enforcement to try to help inform about how
potential changes could be made to improve this enforcement process as well. We've seen the different ways within the Department of Consumer Affairs agencies that the different agencies manage their enforcement cases and prosecute them. There are different code provisions applicable to all, but they have quite a different model than the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. I've also worked closely with Vanessa Whitnell as we've been collaborating on this workload. She's shared with me her workload concerns, and I've shared with her my concerns about prosecuting the cases. So that's sort of what brought this all together here today, and it's very sad that she wasn't able to attend, but I'll do my best to fill in the gaps. First, it's important to keep in perspective this for this entire discussion that the importance of the goals of the Commission, and that the overarching goal is for the enforcement program is to protect the safety and security of school children within the educational system, as well as the integrity of the educational system itself. So against that backdrop, I'll share my observations and recommendations. So here's what we know from our experience working on the Commission's adverse action cases for the past 2.5 years. Oftentimes, events upon which adverse action is sought is based upon events that are quite old. So it's always important to know that time is the enemy of the prosecution in any kind of a prosecution environment, whether it be criminal or administrative discipline as we have here. So time is our enemy, so we want to fight that in every way that we can. If adverse action is delayed in a situation where a credential holder is harming school children, that's a risk to other school children. And if a credential holder has not done an act that has been alleged, then we want to remove that cloud as quickly as possible so they don't have that stigma. So when too much time passes as well, memories fade, people don't want to be involved in the system and prosecute the cases. Evidence gets old, so time is an enemy, and it's something we're always fighting against. The investigative process with the Committee of Credentials takes approximately 6 months to 12 months to complete. However, it does not produce the evidence sufficient to impose adverse action. And this is a really big problem. The committee is required to only find probable cause. Probable cause is not a standard under which we can prosecute adverse action cases. So we have a problem right there. Under Title V, California Code of Regulations, Section 80300, Subpart O, probable cause is defined as reasonable grounds for belief in the existence of facts warranting adverse action. This is a very, very low standard of proof, the lowest in the lexicon for legal prosecution. The definition of probable cause used to be much closer to the standard that is necessary to prosecute cases, which is the clear and convincing standard of proof. The previous regulation, which was changed in 1997, which was Regulation Section 80310, defined probable cause as the weight of the evidence before the Committee of Credentials that is sufficient to cause a majority of the committee to believe that the allegations of misconduct or unfitness are true, and that an administrative hearing would result in suspension or revocation. With that last part of the phrase, that an administrative hearing would result in suspension or revocation,
It raised the bar from just probable cause, a reasonable belief, to add the component that there would be evidence necessary to meet that clear and convincing burden if the matter went to administrative hearing. But as I said, in 1997, that was changed to lower the standard to just bare probable cause. And this has caused the problem of the Commission's cases not being investigated to provide the evidence to the clear and convincing standard. Now, it is a fair point to say that under the Commission's unique process, whereby adverse action can be imposed on a mere probable cause standard, the evidentiary standard of proof of clear and convincing can be waived. A credential holder is who is accused of a violation of the law, whereby their credential can be suspended or revoked, has these basic rights. Number one, to have written charges presented upon which they can mount their defense. That's an accusation. Number two, a right to a hearing on the charges to be proved to the clear and convincing standard. Number three, a right to a written decision that explains how the evidence was sufficient to sustain the charges and how the proven charges support discipline. That's the application of the Morrison factors. Many credential holders waive these rights and accept the committee's findings based upon probable cause and the committee's recommendation for imposition of adverse action. That's fine. People can waive those rights. But the cases where people appeal and come to our office for prosecution have never been investigated to the clear and convincing standard. So the evidence is missing. In the past 2.5 years, approximately 350 adverse action cases have been sent to our office. Of those cases, we were unable to prosecute 26 cases. This was after conducting further investigation and chasing every possible avenue to see if we could impose adverse action. Those cases had to be rejected for lack of evidence. So of the 350 cases, 26 cases we could not prosecute at all. That's 7%. Many other cases required further investigation so that we would be able to prosecute the cases. And that, of course, causes delay. So the committee process takes 6 to 12 months, but does not develop the evidence needed to prosecute the cases. And then when they come to our office, they might be declined. So a credential holder may have this adverse action proceeding hanging over their head for much more than a year before it's even stopped and they're turned loose. And in other cases, much more time is spent to investigate them to reach the clear and convincing standard. So this is a problem that is built into the statutory system. This is governed by Education Code Section 44242.5. In other cases we prosecute for the Department of Consumer Affairs, their process works in a different way. Complaints are received by licensing agencies. The agencies are set up so that their enforcement staff reviews complaints that are received, evaluates them for jurisdiction, makes a determination whether probable cause exists, and then sends them for investigation. Investigations are complete, investigation reports are prepared, and if cases require if cases involve standard practice types of violations, then the investigation report and the evidence is sent to an independent expert witness for review to determine whether there has been a violation of the standard of practice. So by the time the case comes to our office, it has gone through that process whereby complete investigation has been done, all witnesses have been contacted, the respondent in the case has been given their opportunity to be interviewed to discuss the allegations against them and their perspective on the matter. And an expert has reviewed the case in cases where expert review is necessary to determine a violation of standards of practice. And so when we receive those cases, they're ready to go and we can begin prosecution right away. So that's a much quicker and more efficient process, at least for prosecution of the cases by our office. So all of this leads to the first concern that was set forth in the agenda item. The statutory requirement that only the committee shall make the determination that probable cause exists for adverse action has both overburdened the committee with the sheer number of cases it must review and has also caused this conundrum of a lack of evidence to prosecute the cases even after the committee has done its review. We know that the committee is unable to review the volume of cases that are being brought forward. And that's a workload issue. And of course, our issue is the prosecution issue and the lack of evidence. The Committee of Credentials is valuable because of the expertise the committee brings on the background and experience of each of its members. But the committee's highest and best use is compromised by the sheer volume of the cases they are asked to review, and full investigation of cases to support disciplinary charges is not done, when in fact it's essential to prosecute cases. So if disciplinary guidelines are established by the Commission, and I understand this is a topic that will be brought before you in hopefully the February meeting, disciplinary guidelines are the Commission's voice on how disciplinary matters are to be handled. So if disciplinary guidelines are established and provided to the DPP staff to follow, then there's no reason that the staff of the division, staff attorneys, enforcement analysts, investigators, all supervised and trained to follow the disciplinary guidelines, cannot make determinations about when cases should be closed, when they should be investigated, when they need to be reviewed by the Committee of Credentials, to bring their expertise to bear when it's needed the most. An investigation can be done to bring cases up to the standard of proof of clear and convincing evidence needed to prove our cases. This change in workload allocation would require amendment of section 44242.5, subdivision A. Of course, the Commission and stakeholders would need to work together to review the functions of the Committee of Credentials. The second observation made for the agenda item is that the statutory scheme contains a legal error requiring the Commission to initiate an adjudicatory hearing once probable cause has been established. That's an insufficient legal basis to bring an accusation. The standard is clear and convincing evidence. So that again is something that should be changed in section 44242.5. That's subdivision C3B that says after probable cause is determined, the adjudicatory hearing should be initiated. Instead, it should say that the matter shall be referred to the Office of the Attorney General for review, and if warranted by the evidence, the filing of an accusation or statement of issues to initiate an adjudicatory hearing would begin. Then my third observation set forth in the agenda item concerns the statutory requirement that each allegation of an act or omission by an applicant or credential holder for which they may be subject to adverse action shall be presented to the Committee of Credentials. That is each and every allegation. So that, again, is a workload issue that could be, perhaps better allocated. And it also creates an exceptional burden and inefficiency in the processing of our cases. And I'll explain. In addition to just the workload problem, even a case that has been referred to our office that has already been through the entire committee process, when we're working on the case and preparing it for hearing, we will be interviewing the witnesses and always, of course, the primary witness or victim of an event. When we find out that there is more to the story and there is evidence to show allegations that have not gone through the committee, we have to refer it back to the Committee of Credentials for the committee to consider it. We can't simply add in allegations to the accusation and bring it to hearing. So, for example, we had a case where the educator was charged with inappropriate text communication with a student. And as we were preparing the case, the victim, who was at the time a female high school student, who was a bit older by the time the matter was being prepared for hearing, as she was being interviewed by the Deputy Attorney General about the case and preparing for her witness testimony, she then told the Deputy Attorney General, well, this sexting kind of texting that was going on, it was actually based upon a sexual relationship between the student and the teacher. That had not been revealed to the committee, and so it would have to go back through the committee before we could ever bring it to hearing. So then back through that entire loop again before we could bring that accusation to hearing. So that's an example of how the statutory language requiring each allegation to be reviewed by the committee is an inefficiency, and not just inefficiency, but again, evidence, time is the enemy of the prosecutor. And if that takes another year, then will that witness still be available and willing and able to testify? Maybe, maybe not. So that's a problem. Then the fourth observation I made, set forth in the agenda item, is that the committee's jurisdiction to investigate and commence initial review is severely limited to just 6 categories of documents. Those were set forth in a footnote in terms of what those documents are. But this restricts the scope of what may be investigated by the Commission. No other licensing agency has such a restriction. Every licensing agency within the Department of Consumer Affairs has as its primary mission protection of the public, and so their authorization to investigate is very broad. They want to know everything that could possibly be a violation and then triage it from there. In other words, give us all, and then we'll figure out what's a case and what isn't. We'll triage it out. Under this statutory scheme, for example, a report from a psychotherapist that their child patient has been sexually abused or molested by an educator is not one of the listed documents. Thus, would be an insufficient basis to confer jurisdiction on the committee to even commence an initial review. These kind of limitations impair the Commission's public protection mission and delay the review process. If the committee receives notice of a potential violation of the code, staff spends time trying to get the required document to be able to begin an initial review, or they may not be able to at all. And then public protection is compromised. For example, the committee's jurisdiction is limited by requiring that before it can take action in a case involving alleged sexual abuse of a student or by an educator, there must be evidence presented to the committee in the form of a written or oral declaration under penalty of perjury that confirms the personal knowledge of the declarant regarding the acts alleged to constitute misconduct. This is entirely inconsistent with how such cases are actually investigated. The vast majority of sexual abuse cases begin with a complaint by the victim to someone, usually a trusted adult, parent, etc., which is then referred to a police agency and is followed by a law enforcement investigation, which in turn generates a police report. Investigations by local law enforcement never contain an affidavit or declaration under penalty of perjury from a victim. At least I've never seen one. Such declarations create a hardship on the victims of sexual abuse who, believe me, it's hard for them to come forward in the first place. They've mustered the courage to do so, and then they have to go through a process to create a declaration under penalty of perjury. It could even be a minor that doesn't have the capacity to create such a declaration. And if the minor is the only witness to the event, the case couldn't be brought. That's terrible. Successful criminal and administrative prosecutions of sexual abuse cases are built on thorough investigations. Statements from the victims, later his or her direct testimony, potentially pretext undercover telephone conversations with perpetrators, DNA evidence where available, medical and psychiatric reports, testimony from medical and mental health professionals and other witnesses with personal knowledge of relevant facts. There's a lot of evidence that could be brought beyond an affidavit by the victim. So, at the very least, the personal knowledge limitation in section 4424.2.5 should be removed. And after a matter has been referred to the Attorney General's office, if a case is not supported by clear and convincing evidence, it will be rejected. We won't bring a case where we can't meet the burden. So I'd like to share with you a sample statute from another licensing agency with respect to its scope of matters it can investigate. This is for the California Board of Accountancy. Business and Professions Code Section 5103 governs their investigative jurisdiction. It says in subdivision A, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the board may inquire into any alleged violation of this chapter or any other state or federal law, regulation, or rule relevant to the practice of accountancy. You can see how broad that is. This board also has an enforcement advisory committee, which is used to provide technical expertise, advice, and assistance to the investigations of the board. So I'd recommend taking a look at Business and Professions Code Section 5020 regarding the functionality of that committee for ideas on how the Committee of Credentials could potentially be used. So if the jurisdictional basis was broadened for the Commission's enforcement program, it would be an amendment to Section 4424.2.5, Subdivision B, B as in boy. It could be similarly amended, like the Accountancy Board statute, to say that initial review shall be commenced upon receipt of any information alleging an act or omission by an applicant for a credential or credential holder that may constitute cause for adverse action, instead of limiting it to these 6 specific types of documents upon which jurisdiction is conferred. This would improve public protection, avoid delays required when the commission staff has to chase down affidavits when a complaint is received, rather than moving forward with investigating it promptly. Then last is my recommendation, or the observation I made in point 5 on the agenda item about the regulations, about the committee being involved in settlement. Regulation section 80320 requires that a settlement be reviewed and recommended by the committee before it can be sent to the commission for its decision. The commission is the decision maker for all disciplinary actions, all adverse actions. So the intermediary stop in the committee is unnecessary. It's the commission's decision. It causes delay because it has to be scheduled for the committee's review in one meeting and then subsequently going to the commission in its later meeting. So it's a matter of scheduling, and a matter could be delayed up to 3 months just by having to go through the committee. And also, under the current structure, the committee has reviewed a case once and has made a recommendation for what type of adverse action should be imposed. But that recommendation they made was based upon a lack of evidence. So they don't really know what the case is about. So when a settlement comes back to the committee, they look at it and say, well, why aren't we getting revocation, which is what we recommended? Well, they never had the evidence in the first place to know whether or not the case would support revocation. So it creates a push and pull with the committee having to look at cases where they hadn't had evidence in the first place, and then being told, well, now based upon the evidence, your recommendation may not have been appropriate. So it causes a bit of a back and forth on that. So based upon these observations, I'm just going to outline for you quickly the 5 recommendations that I have. Number 1 is amendment of Education Code Section 44242.5, Subdivision A, to allow the Division of Professional Practices to analyze complaints to determine whether probable cause exists in order to determine whether an investigation should be done, and then doing a complete investigation instead of requiring the Committee of Credential to review every allegation, which has caused this overburden on the committee and a situation where the evidence is not being properly developed. And then that would require redefining the role of the committee to areas where their expertise is most valuable. If we had disciplinary guidelines, the staff could act according to those disciplinary guidelines and then bring to the committee the cases that need to be brought to them for their consideration and evaluation whenever that is necessary. And then, of course, changing the shall to may, in meaning that instead of every allegation being reviewed, that the committee could review allegations as brought to it by the committee, by the Division of Professional Practices. Then number 2 is amend the same Education Code section, subdivision C3B, in the language that says the commission shall initiate adjudicatory hearings after probable cause has been established, to instead say that the matter should be referred to the Attorney General's office, and if warranted by the evidence, the filing of an accusation or statement of issues to initiate the adjudicatory hearing would be done. And amending subdivision D as well to broaden the jurisdiction of the the investigator process. Then number 3 is amend subdivision B to broaden the scope of the matters for investigation so that public safety can be fully considered. Number 4 is repeal the regulation section 80320 concerning the committee's review of settlement. And then number 5 is establishing disciplinary guidelines, which again is the voice of the commission about its viewpoint on how adverse action cases should be handled, and would be of such great benefit to the administrative law judges who review your cases, because they collect the evidence, they hear everything, and they make a decision, but they just don't know the commission's viewpoint on what you think is important and what is serious and what is not. They don't have that expertise, and they need the expertise of the commission to help advise them on the decisions, the proposed decisions that they make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schneider. You've raised a world full of interesting issues, and it's hard to take it all in, but I don't think it could have been presented more clearly. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Just have a few closing
Of course.
remarks and then turn it back over to you. We very much appreciate the analysis and the opportunity to think about recommendations for improving this system. I am very sorry that General Counsel Vanessa Whitnell is not able to be here to shed her particular perspective on these issues, but we have discussed this and agree that there are some efficiencies that could be gained that would be significant to this workload by considering movement of the probable cause determination from the committee to the legal staff, as is done in other licensing agencies. We agree with some of the concerns that were raised about jurisdiction and the limitations around jurisdiction, and think that that's an area we really ought to be digging in on. In short, however, what we know for certain is that the current system is not sustainable for the workload that is being presented to it, and that we do need to have some kind of legislative solution to make this a workload that can be managed effectively for the public and for the educator profession. So I'm going to stop it there, and I know we probably have some public comment, but we welcome the opportunity to discuss these issues with you and seek your direction regarding next steps.
Thank you very much, Director Sandy. So we do have a public comment card, one from Lori Easterling. If you come forward and identify yourself for the record.
Better? Okay. Good morning. I'm Lori Easterling. I manage the legislative department for the California Teachers Association. And so on behalf of CTA, the Committee of Credentials is hugely important to the work that we do. And we helped establish the law some 35, 40 years ago. And so when we look at this item, we want the commission to broaden the perspective of how you look at regulatory work and the work that happens over in the legislature. That you're not confined to the items and recommendations produced by Ms. Schneider. That we hope that when we can work collaboratively as a stakeholder in this process, that we don't have the benefit of having Ms. Whitnell here. We don't have the benefit of having our attorneys here. I'm not an attorney myself. But we know as partners in this work that we need to do this collaboratively. And we would hope that you would give us that discretion to work with staff. We understand you want a recommendation for this legislative cycle. So that means, introducing a bill when the legislature reconvenes on January 7th and working towards that effort. So we're just asking you to give us that time and not just limit yourself to the 5 recommendations by Ms. Schneider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Easterling. That is the only public comment card. Commissioners, the floor is open. Any comments or questions before we decide on a direction? Don't see anyone. Oh, you were warming up. Sorry, I didn't see.
Yes, sorry.
Commissioner Hartwig.
First, I want to thank Ms. Schneider and GC Whitnell and all of her team for all the thought that's going into this. It's definitely, I know, a concern that we've discussed at prior meetings about the workload and how to maintain the balance that we have to have for all of the concerns at issue. Is there any, I would be interested to hear perhaps from ED Sandy, since GC Whitnell isn't here, but do you have any more thoughts that you could provide for us as we think about this on what the shift would be in terms of what types of matters would the Committee on Credentials still be able to provide important value for as we think about if we were really shifting or really reducing the work that they would do? Is that, as I'm just preliminarily interested in what that might look like. And Ms. Schneider, maybe you have some sense of that from the other agencies that you work with as well.
We think that and I'm going to be very general because we're early in these conversations, and I also really want to appreciate and welcome the California Teachers Association. Your remarks and the opportunity to collaborate on this, I think, is really quite important. The committee brings important perspective to bear on this work, and they engage in an enormous amount of it before your agenda is presented to you for action. And we absolutely think that there are some ways to more efficiently organize the work so that the committee is not overburdened, but their expertise is still brought to bear. We are in the process of developing a set of disciplinary guidelines to present to you beginning in February that would begin to normalize, if you will, and Linda, you can maybe say some more about what those are if there are questions, but begin to normalize the application of discipline based on the cases that come before us. Invariably, there will be cases that fall outside those guidelines, and that might be the perfect opportunity for the committee to be brought to bear on those and to apply the Morrison factors that are currently what they use in their decision making. That's just one idea. I think we really do need to engage in further discussion and brainstorming with our legal staff, with our stakeholders about what an appropriate role could be that maintains that expertise from the field and from practice on this discipline work, because I think that's critical to your ultimate success in fulfilling your mandate.
Anything on that point, Ms. Schneider?
Well, I think that is the key aspect of what has to be considered. And I'll say that the licensing section has been working with the statutes and regulations in this enforcement work for 2.5 years. We have some experience, but for example, the California Teachers Association has been involved in this process for 40 or 50 years. I don't know how long, but much longer. And certainly they have a very important perspective to bring to this discussion as well. I mean, one concept that I think I touched upon is establishing disciplinary guidelines upon which if a violation falls within the guidelines, the staff could, consider whether it should be investigated or not. If something falls outside of the guidelines, that would be required to be brought to the committee. Any case could be brought to the committee. If staff sees something that they think should have committee consideration, they refer it to the committee. That's a little bit how it works for the California Board of Accountancy. Its staff makes a determination that, this needs to be looked at by the committee, and then the committee it's brought to the committee for investigative hearing. The other thing is that the committee can have a role in overseeing the work and making determinations such as when staffing needs to be increased or adjusted or communications with the commission on, further development of disciplinary guidelines. The guidelines will outline violations of the code and then ask the commission for its viewpoint on how it sees those kinds of violations in terms of a range of discipline that you might consider for the type of violation depending upon application of the Morrison factors, things of that nature. So the guidelines should be as robust as possible, but we're starting from a place where guidelines have never been developed before, so they're not going to be complete. It'll be a work in progress over time. Other agencies have had such guidelines for years, and they still go through the rulemaking process, periodically to update them, because as we live in a society, things are always changing, and we always have to be keeping up, and we're never quite there. So those are just some thoughts on the process, but I'm sure there's other ways to look at it as well. And, I'm very much interested in trying to make this a better enforcement program. I'm certainly willing to listen to any ideas anybody has and to roundtable them for discussion, because there's probably a lot of different ways to look at the issue.
I think what you've done is provide an introduction to a very major topic with lots and lots of interacting parts, and it concerns me to hear that we're on the verge of a new legislative session, and this work, if we're going to make some of these changes to statutes, has to get started right away. So the timing is a factor. The other observation I would make is that because our licensing and disciplinary procedure is set apart from the Department of Consumer Affairs and the agencies under it, it has always seemed to me to be based on the separate concern and heightened concern we have for the safety of school children, as opposed to the victims of accounting, for example. And so there may be some real good reason to be a little different than those licensing agencies. But one thing the present commissioners have not had to do is question whether we're doing the right thing. We basically have operated according to the rules and regulations in place, and have done our best to administer those. And it's only recently that it's gotten to the point where it's too much to handle. So I'd invite comments from my fellow commissioners. I don't think we're going to do more than refer the matter to staff today for study and advice, and look forward to our February meeting for our first look at disciplinary guidelines. Any comments, Madam Chair?
Well, I just want to thank you for the very both well-organized and well-elaborated discussion of what the issues are, and reinforce the point that I think Commissioner Cooney has made about the fact that we need to kind of get staff advice going on this. But I think we've got, thanks to you, a good framework to really use as a way to get an understanding. One of the things that I appreciated, in addition to thinking about our own procedures and how they impact the capacity to get things done in a timely way, is thinking as well about the impact on the prosecution on the one hand and the preservation of candidates' rights on the other. And
Absolutely.
I think keeping all of those criteria in mind will be very important and helpful to us. So mostly just wanted to thank you for giving us that good framework to think about, and look forward to hearing our staff come back and let us know what are some of the approaches we could take.
Thank you.
Commissioner Klatt? We're probably not at the point for a motion at this point, but you're welcome to suggest what you think we should do.
Well, I was looking at the staff recommendation, and it does, I don't know if a motion is required for that, but it just says it requests the Commission authorize the Commission staff to engage with stakeholders and seek legislative solutions. So is that a motion?
All right.
I don't know if that helps people, but I think in moving that, I would say I want to echo what Commissioner Cooney said about the obligation we have to protect children, and that may be different, and also echo the comments about stakeholder engagement, which I feel like we're all assuming that. So with that in mind, if you would like a motion, I would move to authorize staff to start.
We'll consider that a motion. And we have a second by Commissioner Rodriguez. So is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Not seeing any. The motion carries. And thank you for taking the time to come up here and share your ideas with us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
That concludes the business of the Professional Practices Committee. I return the matter to our chair.
All right. Before we convene the next committee, which is the Legislative Committee, I think we should take 7 minutes for a break. Try to come back around 5 of, and then we'll reconvene the last portion of the meeting. I'm supposedly on. There we go. Grab a cup of coffee and find your way back to the table. It's not working at all. All right, help me. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me and take your seat, clap 3 times. All right. We have some folks who are going to need to leave by noon, and I want to be sure that we've gotten through the agenda in time to have the benefit of all of our members here with us as we progress through the rest of it. And you're going to be up, so we'll wait for you. So the next item is the Legislative Committee, and Commissioner Hind, will you please convene that committee?
I shall.
Thank you.
I now convene the November 2018 meeting of the Legislative Committee. The committee has one item before it today. Item 5A, Legislative Proposals, is a brief summary of 3 legislative proposals requiring Commission guidance. Joshua Speaks will present the legislative proposals, and the Commission will discuss and provide direction to staff. He will also present a brief update on an item carrying over from last legislative session. Any votes will be taken separately on each proposal. Mr. Speaks, will you please begin?
Good morning, Commissioners. As usual, I just want to sort of orient you with how the legislative session is going to go. Today is actually the official adjournment day of the 2018 legislative session. So as of today, they're completely done. When they reconvene, it will be a new body based on the elections that we just had. And they will reconvene in December, but then they reconvene to swear in the new members, maybe 1 or 2 symbolic bills get introduced, that sort of thing. And then they will break again until January after the holidays. So this is the start of a new 2-year session. And just to remind you all of what that means that any bills that are introduced in the first year of a 2-year session, if they don't meet their deadlines during that first year, they get a second crack at it during the second year of the session. They sort of come back to life, as it were. So this is actually a very good time for the Commission to be looking at more complicated items like the last one, because it gives us a longer period of time to have those discussions, work through things with our stakeholders and that sort of thing. As Commissioner Hines said, we have a couple of items to discuss, and then I wanted to also explain to you overall what we're going to do with these items this year. Because it's a little different. As you read through these items, you'll see that they're not really big, significant, kind of eye-catching things. And so the plan is to look for an author for what we're calling a minor policy bill. And so what a minor policy bill is you take a number of minor items that may not carry the weight that would interest an author on their own, and you roll them all into one bill. Included with the items we're going to be discussing today would be the early completion item, the early completion option item that you discussed yesterday. And we would seek one author to sponsor one bill to handle all of these items. Now, if one of the items proved particularly controversial or tricky, which we don't anticipate, but if that were to happen, then you can just pull that item out of the bill and move forward with the rest of them so that you don't jeopardize all of these changes because of one of them. So with that, I'll start on the first item, which involves the statutory requirements for receiving a clear credential. And this item is fairly straightforward. It's kind of a on the border between a technical and a policy change. Education Code Section 44259 delineates a variety of requirements that single and multiple subject preliminary and clear credential programs have to meet. And paragraph C lists the requirements for receiving a clear credential. Some of those requirements are actually now handled in a preliminary program, and so they're not treated again during an induction program because they've already been covered in the preliminary program. Now, because of that, it leads to some confusion both with induction programs and also with people who are just looking at the requirements because they're saying, well, really, do we have to do this as part of our induction program? And staff here have to say, well, no, it's actually now covered under the preliminary, so you don't have to cover it twice. And so the idea for this proposal is just taking those requirements that are already covered under a preliminary program and putting them in a different paragraph of the same code section where the preliminary program requirements are outlined. So it's really just conforming the statute to what is current practice. And as I said, it's a fairly straightforward item, so I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
When you say that these things are already covered in a preliminary program, does that also include out of state, or is that something a separate evaluation process?
As to whether or not they're covered in an out-of-state program, that would vary depending on the state. But the way that out-of-state teachers are processed when they come into California is if they have a credential, then we should say a professional level credential, then we give them an equivalent California professional level credential. And then if there are shortcomings in their preparation that we've identified, the biggest one would be English learner training, for example, then they have between the time that they receive their preliminary credential and the time that they clear their credential, they have to fulfill that remaining requirement. So it's a different process. No.
Okay, so I think we're dealing with these each individually. Is that correct? So I have no public comments, and commissioners have no further comments or questions on this. So we're going to go ahead and entertain a motion to approve the first legislative proposal to update the clear credentialing requirements. Moved by Commissioner Marks, second by Commissioner Rodriguez. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Oh, I'm sorry, one abstention. Thank you. Okay, next one.
So the next item is allowing the use of professional education baccalaureate degrees to fulfill the minimum requirements for the issue of an education specialist or pupil personnel services credential. So as you may recall, back in 2017, Assemblymember O'Donnell authored a bill, AB 170, that for the first time in 30 or so years, allowed the use of education baccalaureate degrees to meet the requirements for a multiple subject credential. So up until that time, there was a section of the Ed Code that said that one of the requirements to receive a credential was that you had to have a baccalaureate degree in a subject other than professional education. And so Assemblymember O'Donnell as I said, sponsored legislation to make that change, but that change was limited only to multiple subject credentials. So now I don't remember the exact wording of the statute, but it's something like, you know, notwithstanding what we just said, you can use it for multiple subject credentials. What we would like to do is expand that to include education specialist credentials and also PPS credentials. And the reason for that is because as we've implemented this, we've realized that it does create some inequities. And the most significant example is just you have a teacher who now is getting their credential on the basis of, you know, a degree in education. And then they go into their classroom, they establish themselves as a teacher, they demonstrate that they're a good teacher, and they get interested in another area. They decide, hey, I'd like to get more involved in special education field, or I'd like to get one of these PPS credentials, you know, and help kids in a different way. You've got a person that's established themselves as a teacher. They have demonstrated their value in that. Now they want to go into a harder to fill area and demonstrate their value again in that area, and we would have to say no to those folks because either that or tell them to go back and get a second baccalaureate degree. Another example that we have is, and this is probably sort of a sharper example because the idea of using ed degrees is still very new in California. All other 49 states allow education majors to get, you know, any appropriate and relevant teaching credential. And so in other states, the major is a fairly common one. And under current law, a teacher who's coming into California with an ed major and an existing out-of-state education specialist or PPS credential would be allowed to receive an equivalent credential because that's the way our out-of-state statute reads. If you have that credential from another state, then we give you the equivalent credential in California. However, if a peer who graduated from the same program and was a multiple subject teacher came into California, they would get their multiple subject credential. And then if they chose, again, to go into one of those tough to fill fields, we would have to say, no, I'm sorry, you had the exact same educational background as the person that we handed that ed specialist or that PPS credential to, but because you came in with only your multiple subject credential, we can't hand you the exact same credential that we handed them. So, you know, as we've been working through and seeing these various inequities, staff felt it made a lot of sense to expand that exemption to, again, the education specialist field and the pupil PPS credentials.
Thank you. I have no public comment cards on this proposal. Do commissioners? Oh, it's coming. Good eye. Good morning, Mr. Williams. Will you please state your name and affiliation for the record?
There we go. Hi, my name is Robert Williams. I'm the Associate Dean for the Graduate College of Education at San Francisco State. Hi. I have a question. Am I correct that you're talking about a bachelor's would qualify for PPS?
Well, the bachelor's would, all of those credentials are required to have a baccalaureate degree. Whether or not that has, that gives you sufficient expertise in and of itself for the credential is a different question. But the underlying baccalaureate degree would, a person holding that underlying baccalaureate degree who met all the other qualifications would still be eligible.
I'm just trying to understand for, the reason I'm asking is that, does this mean that master's programs would not be a requirement?
No.
As per this? Okay.
No,
just want to make sure. I just want to make sure of that.
So for example, and Terry, please feel free to tell me if I'm doing this wrong. If you wanted to get a PPS credential in counseling, and you had your undergraduate degree in education, and then you went back and got a master's degree in, you know, the appropriate master's degree, under the current system, you would still not be eligible to then go ahead and get your PPS credential.
All of the Commission's credentials, other than the career technical education and adult education credentials, require the holder as a basic foundational issue to hold a bachelor's degree. A bachelor's degree in education had been prohibited for all credentials until the O'Donnell bill that allowed it for multiple subject. We also run into a situation now, that, as Mr. Speaks was explaining, that if they now hold a multiple subject based on their bachelor's degree in education and they want to become a special education teacher, there's a problem. Or if they want to become a PPS counselor or school social worker, there's a prohibition. So there's express prohibitions that we're working on trying to move out. Every credential candidate still has to do their professional preparation, which is above and beyond, or in some cases, like an integrated program, could be done concurrently. So no, master's degrees would still be the situation for counselors, psychologists, and school social workers.
Okay, Commissioner Sloan.
So I have a question about why the professional education baccalaureate cannot be used for secondary credentials, because anybody seeking a credential is required to go through a program that meets the Commission's program standards, common standards, preconditions, etc. All teacher education candidates, regardless of their major, need to show subject matter competency either through a program pathway or an exam, among the other teacher performance assessments and everything else that they're required to do. So what are the issues with having a professional education baccalaureate for a secondary pathway?
First of all, I think one of the things that the Commission started at their last meeting was a longer discussion about what it really means to have subject matter expertise in a particular field.
Right.
And so I think part of the reason that we're limiting this when it comes to secondary credentials is because we didn't want to rush into making that change when the Commission is actually just on the verge of having what I think will be sort of a really fruitful and longer discussion about those issues. It may be that at the end of those conversations, the Commission does say, you know what, it would be appropriate to make that change as well. And also, I think that it might be fair to say that this is sort of a shifting mindset for education in California. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I think it's appropriate to sort of take slow steps forward instead of, just as the O'Donnell bill only opened it up to one particular area, it's sort of taking baby steps, I guess is the way I would put it.
So I do understand that, but I also think about people who, we see this even when people come into our teacher preparation programs in one area and then decide pretty quickly on they want to move into secondary or, vice versa. So somebody starting an education degree when they're 18 years old and then realizing halfway through, gosh, I really wanted to be, now I want to be a math teacher. It's something that we have to consider, particularly since we don't require a degree in an area for our secondary candidates either. But I agree. I don't want to slow down this process, but these are things we'll consider when we go on quickly, hopefully.
If a candidate in another state completes an education major and earns a credential in that state, they get to come to our state and they get a California credential. And the fact that they have an education major in that other state, in essence, gets whitewashed by the fact that they now have a credential. They could become a special ed teacher, they could become a PPS, whomever. In other states, when people do an education major and don't also get the credential, what that usually means is the person did the education major and got their bachelor's degree, and they were not able to pass the assessment that the state gives at the end of the program. And so they were not eligible to get a credential. The concern is those people are not necessarily as well prepared. And so education majors from out of state, as long as they actually got a credential in that state, they do get to come to our state and get whatever credential they want. And I think Mr. Speaks is right. The idea of moving too quickly in that area is concerning. And California definitely prohibited the education major after Sputnik and the whole science thing, and we really want people to know their content area. And if after our discussion on subject matter competence, you actually decide going in that direction in the future, there'll be other legislative years, and it will ensure that Mr. Speaks continues to remain employed.
Or once we find an author, we can just slip it in. Did you want to have a comment, Commissioner Klatt? Was you just answered? Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so we will entertain a motion for the Commission to approve the proposals regarding the use of professional education baccalaureates.
Can I ask a procedural question?
Sure.
I may have, it might be possible that I should have abstained from the last vote, and I'm not sure exactly what we're voting to do right now, what we're approving or moving
So
forward
these
on.
are proposals to then go out and find somebody, right? An author to create a bill. So these things, if we found someone, would all go into one bill.
And there's so this is it. There's not another decision for us to decide to move forward on something. This is.
Yeah, that would be correct. But in these,
Right.
these are
Right.
things that would show up in a bill, and we would attempt to move them through the legislature.
So I really should have abstained from the last one, and I'll abstain from this one. I'm not sure if there's a procedure for doing that.
I think that's sufficient. So we will record that Commissioner Redmond. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm still looking for a motion. Okay, you just say so moved because I read it. All right, moved by Commissioner Marks as second. Okay, second by Commissioner Olivey. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? 2 abstentions. All right, thank you. And the next one is a technical proposal updating some terminology in the education code. Go ahead.
And this is really almost a textbook definition of technical. The proposal would, in 2 different places in Education Code Section 44257, replace the phrase foreign language with the phrase world language. So it has no substantive effect on the statute, but exactly. It reflects the terminology that's being used in the world languages community. It reflects the terminology that's used over at the department, and we just think it's an appropriate change to make. In addition to that, that statute has various world languages listed, and it says, the commission shall offer credentials in XYZ languages and then other languages as the commission determines are appropriate. Well, one of the languages that's listed there is Chinese. And we actually offer credentials in both Mandarin and Cantonese. And so we would just like to, again, strike out the word Chinese and replace it with both of those languages to reflect that they're distinct languages and that they're both taught in our schools.
Thank you so much. I have no public comment cards on this proposal. Commissioners, do you have any questions or concerns? Okay. Excellent. We have a motion by Commissioner Klatt to update wherever it went, to reflect the correct terminology in the Ed Code. Do we have a second? Commissioner Kung. Further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? 1. Okay. Motion carries. Thank you so much. And last, we have an update on our assignment monitoring modernization efforts. This item does not require any action. Mr. Speaks, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. We just felt it was appropriate to bring this one back to the commission since we have some new commissioners from when this was first authorized. So a year ago, the commission authorized us to pursue a legislative proposal that would allow us to update the way we do the assignment monitoring process. And at its core, right now that's a paper process, and we monitor schools. We monitor the bottom 3 deciles, and then we also monitor a quarter of all assignments every year, so that over a 4-year period, all schools in the state, all assignments, I should say, in the state are monitored. That process involves a lot of paperwork going back and forth between districts and counties, and then the counties reporting to the commission. That's why it's only a quarter of all assignments every year, because it's such an intensive paper process. Well, those decile schools are identified based on their API scores. API is no longer with us, so we're still using 2012 API scores to determine which schools require that annual monitoring. So in the process of trying to figure out where we would go on that piece, and also how we would reflect the state's ESSA plan, which requires the Department of Education to report on properly assigned teachers, we decided that it would make sense to automate the process. Essentially, all the data, or most of the data, lives with either the commission or the department. And so if we create a system, that's the SAS system that's been discussed here, that allows us to compare that data, then we can automate a significant portion of that process, the vast majority of it. And the idea that we put forward in legislation was that we would create a system that would compare those two data sets, the teaching assignments from the department and the teaching credential information held by the commission. And for the vast majority of those assignments, it's just going to match up. You're going to have an elementary school teacher with a multiple subject credential. The system can automate that process and say they're good to go. In those cases where there appears to be a mismatch, we then give the counties and the districts an opportunity through an online reporting process to see those potential, we're calling them potential misassignments. And they would have a set of responses. So they could say, yeah, that's actually a misassignment. We need to fix that. They could say, oh, this person's on this particular local waiver. That's, a legal assignment for them. And then once we get that report back from the districts and the counties, then we would have a full picture of every school in the state and all of their misassignments for the year. So we would be switching to annual assignment monitoring of all schools across the state, but utilizing data to do it in a more efficient way so that we're not massively increasing the burden on those folks. So that's real high-level overview for folks who weren't here when that was first authorized. Unfortunately, the bill to do that got caught up in the Assembly Appropriations Committee over cost issues. Ironically, the budget language and the authorization of funds in the budget went through, which is why we're able to start working on the system now, even though the bill language hasn't gone through. And so what we're doing is just planning on taking a second crack at that same concept, finding a new author and running the bill language again this year, now that we know that the fiscal piece won't be a holdup because the fiscal piece went through in the budget.
Thank you. We have one public comment card. Jenny Teresi, if you could please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning. I'm Jenny Teresi, Credentials Administrator for Riverside County Office of Education. This morning I'm speaking on behalf of the Credentials Networking Subcommittee of CSES's PASCO group. So we're a subcommittee. And I really, I'm addressing the AMR item because, as you can imagine, this topic is very crucial to county offices of education. And, it represents a very large percentage of the work that we do. I would say it's almost half of what we do in my office over the course of a year, in addition to processing apps and the usual things that provide services and training to our districts. And so, this has huge implications for county offices. And so the idea of modernization is really exciting, but it's also kind of frightening because just of the unknown. We really don't know what those exceptions reports will produce. And so going from 25% to 100% annually is, gives us pause. And I just wanted to thank the commission also, and Mr. Speaks in particular, just for including us in the conversation last year. You listened to our questions and our suggestions and concerns, and we would just very much like to express our interest in participating again this year. Thank you.
And I'll just say that we are, again, planning on getting together the same group of stakeholders that we had last year. We found those conversations to be really helpful and really productive, and so we will be continuing those.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on this piece? Okay. As for while we're talking about technological things, we need to do something else before you leave. We need to go back to that first vote on the first proposal and reopen it and retake the vote so that you can properly abstain. So we can stay with the same motion and everything? Okay, so the motion is still the same. To approve the legislative proposal to update the clear credentialing requirements. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Any abstentions? Please note we have 2 abstentions. Thank you. Motion carries. And with that, this concludes the business before the Legislative Committee. The committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
And I'd now like to reconvene the general session and move to agenda item 2H, interview and recommendation as to vacancies, members, and alternates for the Committee of Credentials. The ad hoc committee recommends to the full commission the appointment of Daryl Wu to serve in the school board member position on the Committee of Credentials. The committee also recommends that Ray Prock Jr. and Kenneth Dixon be appointed as school board member alternates. And I move to approve the recommendations of the ad hoc committee. Is there any discussion? Thank you very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And now we have the report of the closed session agenda. Commissioner Hines will read the closed session report.
All right, thank you. Staff briefed the commission on the case of Kathleen Carroll versus CTC, and no reportable action was taken. Staff briefed the commission on the case of Emeterio Escobar versus CTC, and no reportable action was taken. Staff briefed the commission on the case of Daniel Lindstrom versus CTC, and no reportable action was taken. The commission granted the following petitions for reinstatement: Betty Little, Abe Snowbar, Anthony Dahl, Billy Woody II. The commission denied the following petitions for reinstatement: Scott Fish, Thomas Sinagra. The commission rejected the proposed decision in the matters of Jimmy Gonzalez and Michael Turner Jr. and called for the transcript. The commission adopted the proposed decision in the matter of Alan Young. The commission adopted the decision and order in the following matters: Emily Ismail, Mark Petrowski. The commission granted the following requests for reconsideration and sustained its previous decisions: Janelle Burns, Richard Odegaard. The commission granted reconsideration in the matter of Tiffany Tung and remanded the matter back to the administrative law judge for the sole purpose of allowing Ms. Tung to offer evidence in mitigation concerning the appropriate adverse action. The commission discussed consent calendar item number 5, Henry Armenta Jr., and remanded the matter back to the Committee on Credentials.
All right. Very good. Zipping right along. Item 2J is new business. The bi-monthly agenda is presented for information. And Executive Director Sandy, you want to make a comment about that?
I just wanted to point this out to you, commissioners, that we use this vehicle as a way of projecting what's coming at the next 2 meetings, and it typically reflects work that's in progress or new work that we know is coming. But if any of you would like the opportunity to discuss potential agenda items, we would welcome your conversation about that, and I think you should feel free to reach out to the chair, the vice chair, or myself about that, and we will look at what we can do to put things on the agenda at your request. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and what we have planned at this point is grounded, but somewhat of a guesstimate in terms of exactly how things will unfold and what will be needed at each month. So nothing is in concrete at this point. We have an audience presentation, at least one. Jenny, Teresa, can you state your name and your role for this particular presentation? You have so many.
Good morning again.
Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Darling Hammond. I'm Jenny Teresi, the Credentials Administrator with Riverside County Office of Education. This morning, I'm speaking as the 2018 CCAC President. So on behalf of the organization for the new commissioners is the Credential Counselors and Analysts of California. Our 40th anniversary conference was held in October the 10th, 11th, and 12th at the Doubletree here in Sacramento. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you to Dr. Sandy and Terry Clark, Charlie Waters, for the collaboration, the ongoing partnership that we have in producing this conference year after year. For newer commissioners, it's a year-long process to plan and then to put on the conference. And we meet with CTC staff regularly during the weeks of commission meetings. And it's a lot of work, and I just appreciate the commitment, the time that you spend working with the committee, and that preparing and allowing your staff to present this critical training to the field. We have over 800 participants. We've had to put a cap on the amount of people because the facility just can't handle anymore. We don't want to get the fire marshal down on us. So, but over 800 credential analysts. Sometimes we have HR administrators, many people that touch the credentialing process from the different constituencies, districts, counties, institutions of higher ed, participate on an annual basis. And we thank you so much for continuing this partnership with us. And we look forward we're starting our planning right now for the 2019 conference. And we just look forward to working with you, of course, going forward and many years from going forward. Thank you.
Any other audience presentations? Seeing none. Item 2K is the nominations and elections for chair and vice chair of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing for 2019. Executive Director Sandy will manage this item.
Commissioners, Section 301 of your policy manual allows for nominations for the chair and vice chair to be made orally in open session at the last meeting of the calendar year of the Commission. That said, are there any nominations for chair? Commissioner Rodriguez.
I would accept. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for the position of chair? Seeing none, I will now close the nominations for the chair. Are there nominations for the vice chair position? Commissioner Kung.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Alicia Hine.
And you?
I accept. Thank you.
Are there any other nominations for the position of vice chair? Seeing none, I'll now close the nominations for vice chair. Before we open elections, I would like to invite each nominee to make a brief statement. We'll start with the chair. Commissioner Darlene Hammond, would you like to make a statement?
I will keep it very brief. I feel like we have such a wonderful commission and such a strong and purposeful agenda that we've been pursuing for a number of years, and we can begin to see some of those things coming to fruition, and that's, I think, exciting for us and really positive for the children and teachers of this state and the educational leaders. So I'm excited to see it through and carry a lot of this work across the finish line.
So Section 301D of your policy manual mandates that the chair and vice chair shall be selected by roll call voice vote. However, in the past, we're going to do the chair first and then we'll do the vice chair. We're going to one at a time. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have in the past done this through acclamation. So I'm seeking a motion to suspend the policy manual and vote to elect Commissioner Darlene Hammond to serve as chair of the commission through acclamation. Is there such a motion? That was moved by Commissioner Olive. Is there a second? Commissioner Aide Rodriguez. Are there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Madam Chair, welcome. Commissioner Hine, would you like to make a statement?
Following Commissioner Darlene Hammond, I don't know. Just that it has been an honor to serve as vice chair this past year, and it will be a pleasure to serve. Actually, I think it's my final year as a commissioner too. I'm terming out soon, so thank you for putting your trust in me once again to vice chair.
Say something about our vice chair. Well, you bring so much wisdom to the table, but I don't know if everybody knows all the areas in which we should be tapping that wisdom. So in addition to her teaching and, activism at the school site and all of that, Commissioner Hind has taken the tests that we require our candidates to take just to see what they're like and to be able to kind of inform us in our process. She's currently engaged in the administrator performance assessment, so we can get more information from her about that. And I think in every way, every aspect of being a professional educator in the state of California is something that Alicia has been committed both to engaging in and to excelling in, and then to being able to inform the rest of the profession about. So we're very blessed to have her in this role. And before we vote, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to have that input and insight in the process that we have of developing the agenda and thinking about our steps in this commission.
So is there a motion to suspend the policy manual and elect Commissioner Hind to serve as vice chair through acclamation? Commissioner Hartwig moved, seconded by Commissioner Olivey. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Congratulations, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. And that concludes the elections.
And ahead of schedule, we now adjourn the November 2018 meeting of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. The next meeting will be in the new year. We will see you on February 7th and 8th, 2019. Yay! Have a wonderful holiday season to everyone.
Honestly, wow. It's just gone.